are doing a talk, I think, on taking the BDSM out of PCI, achieving compliance through open source solutions. So, who are these schmucks that are up here at DerbyCon wanting to talk about PCI? Because that's what's fun to do on a Sunday. Damn, see, drink. I don't know what week I'm in, much less day or hour. So anyway, I'm Erin, Jacobs, SecBarbie on most social circles and just hey you and others. And
I'm Zack.
He's just drinking today.
So,
that transition worked really well, by the way.
Because you clicked right through. So, every time someone puts up and does their speak, they list their credentials of what they do and who they are and their long history of stuff. Mine and Erin's habit is to leave the slide blank. Don't believe anything we're going to say. Don't believe anything in our past credentials. We do have experience in this, but challenge, question, validate on your own. We encourage you to do that not just for our talk, but any other talks, and we welcome it. So, yeah. That transition just did not.
That was awesome. Anyway, to go into it. Drink. Both of us have had experience both executing PCI, may or may not be QSAs, and have been around the block in security for quite some time. So that being said, let's talk about what this talk actually is. This talk is a very, very quick overview of PCI. One question I have for the room right now is, how many people by show of hands are in information security? Yay, you're at the right con. Next. How many of you guys deal with PCI in your day-to-day work? Perfect. That was much better than in BrewCon. So, what we're going to go over is we're going to go over open source, free, and commercial solutions to achieve compliance through PCI, but not just PCI. We're going to talk about some of the more common areas that PCI controls have deficiencies in almost every organization, from small business scalable all the way up into large, highly technical, high-performance enterprise. We're going to go through leveraging the controls to improve overall security because, we come from a security background. We don't necessarily come from a, hey, rah, we heart PCI background. We actually want to do good for the community. And let's just be frank, compliance tends to be a speed bump more times than it's not. So we're also going to have a few compliance strategies and quick wins, a little question and answer session. Most importantly, what this talk is not, it's not every possible PCI gotcha that's out there, and this is not a talk that we're going to bash PCI, praise it, or try to push for any kind of changes with the PCI standard. Wow, Saturday. Hello, guys. So while we are a QSA and QSAC shop, we are not your QSA in most cases. Your mileage may vary. What we do ask is that you question your QSA. Ask your QSA questions. If that QSA is not giving you the correct answers, maybe get a different QSA. Ask around. We do understand that just like CISSPs, QSAs have to take a test, and a lot of people are awesome at taking tests, but don't have actual implementation experience. This is something that we're coming at you with, that we have technical implementation experience, and that we challenge you guys to get people that do. Do you want to talk about our legal counsel?
Oh, Addie's our legal counsel.
So yeah, Miss Addie Bull on Twitter is our legal counsel, and so she has advise us of what we can and cannot say. So during the question and answer period of the talk, if we can't answer your questions directly during the question and answer period, we may or may not be at a bar later that we might be able to answer the question that might not be recorded and on the record. So as
we will answer questions.
We will answer questions.
No questions.
This is PCI, there are no questions. But although, like some people's Twitter handles say, this may or may not be the views of our employer, this is the views of our employer and us, so your mileage may vary. So look at this. Look at all these awesome talks that have been given on PCI. So another talk on PCI? Yeah, 2004 through 2012 called and they wanted their talks back. That's not what this is. We know we've talked and belabored the subject so much, but one thing that we are here to talk about are things to actually have solutions to the problem. We go and we see a lot of conferences, we speak at a lot of conferences, a lot of people like to point out problems, but no one's coming up with solutions. So this is going to be a platform for not only us to give you some solutions, but us asking you guys a favor to contribute to the actual Society of Information Security from an industry community level. So yeah, no, this isn't new, but it's not being fixed. But this isn't a PCI relevant issue. This is a security issue. PCI is just a component of it. That's why awesome chart, you all should read it, by the way. No one ever reads that. Yeah, so we love our charts, but this one's funnier. But the two main reasons that people don't have problems with PCI is, yes, they got it, is that it's high cost and it's high difficulty levels to achieve PCI compliance, especially depending on who you're working with. And more organizations are having to comply with PCI, especially as 3.0 is going to come out, which is getting a little more strict around requiring their actual clients to push down vendor compliance. So that being the case, this is our fun slide because we all like to make fun of the acronym. So we have fun names. Feel free to submit them to the contact at the end of this presentation to give us some more fun ones. But we make fun of PCI a little bit, and the reason you can't see the logo is because Addie, being our legal counsel, told us that since this is not an endorsed talk by the PCI Council, nor any other QSAC, we are not using their logo. Anywhere at all. We heart PCI Council, don't take our QSAC away. So that being said, along with all those awesome talks we had in the previous slide, haters are going to hate. Why does everyone hate PCI so much? I mean, BDSM seemed like a logical thing to associate PCI with because it is painful. You know, it does destroy IT budgets as a whole. I mean, how many people, by a show of hands in this room, have gotten security initiatives pushed through their budgets because they said it's required by some, doesn't have to be PCI, but some kind of compliance? Yay! That's the most awesome thing. So PCI generally can't be ignored. It's being pushed down to your organizations by somebody. And a lot of people probably in this room have had horrible experience with QSAs. A lot of QSAs that get put on site, and I'm not bashing any particular company or anything, a lot of them are juniors, a lot of them pass, a lot of them maybe have expertise in certain components, but you put them in front of some of your system engineers, and they have no idea what they're talking about. They're Googling stuff while they're on site, but you know, they're still gonna question and force things that don't make sense. So I'm gonna go really fast through this since we're a little down on time. So let's talk about scope with PCI. So this is how the PCI Standards Council defines scope. You can read, right? There it is. The slides will be online later. Drink now. Right, so with PCI, and this is one of the more important parts, are the levels. So level 1 compliance is going to require one of the lovely QSA shops to come on site and actually do your assessment. But do the levels matter anymore? They really don't, because with a lot of organizations, we're getting it pushed down, like I said earlier. And so I've had companies that we've worked with that they don't even store cardholder data, but yet they're getting told by their legal counsel, we need to be PCI level 1 compliant. Okay, as a QSA, that's a fun challenge. How do we define a scope that doesn't exist? So for most organizations, the goal is definitely to limit the scope, apply the security check boxes, controls, and then pass the attestation of compliance. Again, does anyone in this room not know what cardholder data is? Raise a hand. Nobody, everyone knows what it is. Simple TLDR, you cannot store the sensitive authentication data anywhere. I forgot there was the drinking game there. So, PCI scope, the serious stuff, let's pay attention. So there used to be 3 items with PCI scope, but it's really not. It's really these 5. Any system that stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data, or manages those systems, or is directly connected to those systems. So where does it end? That's, again, let's go back to having a good QSA that understands and can define, and I want to say is creative with the controls around PCI scope. So let's talk about limiting scope for 2 seconds. I'm going to hand it over to Zack. There's a lot of things to consider. You know, we could always make it somebody else's problem through tokenization, P2PE, or outsourcing it entirely, but guess what? 3.0, it's still your responsibility in the end. So, round 1. No more drinking for you, it's my turn.
I'm going to drink still. So, the reason we really wanted to give this talk was to take and start looking at these open source solutions that we can do to address the PCI compliance requirements. A lot of times, like we were saying, you know, a commercial solution can single-handedly destroy your entire budget. And so we want to look at, you know, what are ways we can focus on spending our money on resources, on smart people like those of you in the room, and focus on that over just buying product X. But sometimes buying a product is also a good thing. So first of all, why do we go open source? Like I was saying, we invest in the people. We don't focus on buying just a product off the shelf, but people we can manage the resources and time to focus on multiple initiatives. Also, you know, using open source solutions can be covered in every PCI requirement other than one. Well, technically two, but one actual requirement, which is the external vulnerability scans, where guess what? You're going to have to pay money somehow. The other caveat to that is obviously if you're getting an assessment, you have to pay the QSA shop that's doing the assessment, but that's only if you're level 1 or required to do so. And using open source, obviously you've got flexibility. You've got really the customization versus, you know, I bought this product, can't do it. Well, what can we do to make it do it? Wait till the next cycle, we might implement it. And you'll get locked in a lot of these commercial solutions in long-term contracts, or you're going to deploy the system throughout the environment, and it's going to be more cost-effective just to keep renewing it and scaling with it than use something new or try something different. So that being said, though, it's not always the best option to go open source, but we're going to focus on it. These are some of the reasons why. It just works sometimes if you go with a commercial product. You've got that support. You've got the backing from the vendor to be able to take, and if you have a problem, you don't have to turn to some forum or email list. We'll talk more in those kind of hybrid where it's open source with a commercial backing for support, which is a great option. And sometimes you just want to spend money on it because I just want to be done with it, give me that checkbox. That's not what we're talking about, is just getting that checkbox.
It just works.
But this is a problem we see over and over, is that with these open source solutions, there's no clear configuration guidelines. There's a how to get started for general, you know, installation, but nothing about how to do it for PCI or any other initiative. And it's all theoretical. We talk a lot of times about people saying, oh, you should log and do log analysis, but it's just at a very high level.
No, just.
Oh, you tapped. High level theoretical level. And a lot of these open source or these free solutions are freemium. Oh, it's free for the first 10. You're going to be using more than 10 and find out down the line you spend all this time and all this work on something that's going to cost you more. And they typically focus on the open source solutions, and these other things focus on one or the other OS for their implementation. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I do want to say one little thing. So one of the items that when we were looking to do this talk, is that a lot of QSAs are helpful, and they do give these open source solutions as a possible solution. The problem is you're staring at the other side of the table at a small to mid-size or even large company that the resources there, they're just scratching their head going, okay, you know, what do we do with this? How do we configure it? A lot of them don't have the time or don't care.
Yeah, so we decided to kind of start an initiative. We decided it's time for us to make a change instead of just keep bitching on and on about how this stuff doesn't work, it's hard, it's difficult. Let's start sharing the knowledge from our experience and from your experiences and coming together and finding out ways we can do it for next to nothing. So we decided to start the Open PCI project. Go ahead, scan the QR code if you're willing and able and daring. It's nothing bad, I swear. It's totally safe.
It's not puppy porn.
So, it's not Addie's site. So, openpciproject.com is the domain. Right now it just redirects, but it'll bounce off elsewhere when I actually have time to upload it. But why such a long domain name? Well, OpenPCI was taken in every possible way, and we weren't going to spend $1,200 for a domain name. And, well, we do own Hack PCI, but I figured some people might get a little mad, council.
I don't think would be very happy with that one.
So, it does work, though. So that's easy to remember. But really, we decided to start this initiative to have this goal. Let's take and come up with how-to guides. Let's come up with recommendations, solutions for people to be able to, who may not have a lot of experience in deploying a certain open source solution, have those kind of guidelines that they can go to their managers and say, hey, we can use this open source tool. We don't have to spend all this money on this, and this will actually help me improve the organization's security as a whole, instead of dropping $30,000 on our log events collector. I won't name names because I got in trouble previously for that. So yeah, it's expensive for some of these things. So why not take a look at some open source things we can use to do that versus buying every product to fit everything, and spend that money more wisely when we can. So really the goal of the Open PCI project is to focus on cross-platform, tried and tested, scalable, but also applicable to small mom and pop shops. Focus on obviously way beyond compliance. Like we were saying earlier, PCI can be an initiative for you to go to your boss and say, I need time, I need money. Or even to your employees saying, hey, here's some time, here's some money, management says this is okay. And then obviously focusing on the pros and cons of each of these open source solutions and not say, oh, you should always use open source. It's the best option, always. It's not. It really isn't always the best option. It's a great option, but sometimes you need to weigh that with your other options as well. And the biggest thing we wanted to do is start offering walkthrough guides and straight configurations instead of looking at, if you're not familiar with PCI frequently, looking at the standard going, what does this mean? I have to log this stuff. What exactly do I have to log? What exactly is antivirus? It says most common. What is most common? What does a QSA say? So providing that kind of guidance as an opinion, ask your QSA. You're going to hear that disclaimer a lot. The other one you're going to hear a lot is, it depends. I'm sorry. That's just the world of PCI. I will drink every time I say it depends, I swear. Keep me accountable, I like that.
Derby, by the way.
And finally, something that's manageable. The last thing I want to do, or we want this project to do, is recommend something that is, oh yeah, this is great. You can install it on one system at a time. Well, what if you have 100,000 systems you have to manage? So we want something that's going to be able to manage not just short-term, but long-term as well. So there's always this obligatory disclaimer that I've decided to start adding in on my slides. We mentioned a lot of things, and a lot of things are in progress and in work, and we need a lot of help too. Don't get me wrong, we're going to feel a lot of it. But I'm kind of slow, for some reason, I don't know why, at updating things. I apologize for my slowness in updating things, but I'm going to throw that disclaimer out right now. If you don't see the site updated next week, harass me on Twitter, harass me over email, be like, dude, where's the updates, and I'll post them. Oh yeah, the Zack attack update's coming anytime now, for those of you who saw that talk last year. It's been a year. Okay, fine, I'll make this promise now on recording. I'll update it so it works on Kali in the next week. Cool? Cool. Make people happy. So, it's only when I say it. So really, these are the 12 high-level descriptions of the PCI requirements. These are what kind of all the sub-requirements fall under, 1 through 12. And we kind of went through and looked at what are the top issues, not just for our clients, but clients as a whole, organizations as a whole, not just, again, for PCI, but in general. Requirement number 1 for PCI, implement firewalls and strong filtering. We got that covered. People know how to firewall by now, and if they don't, well, they have bigger issues. Changing vendor defaults. Come on, we know how to change a password. We've been doing this for ages. Protect cardholder data. We can encrypt stuff. We know how to encrypt stuff. Same thing in transit. SSL is a cake now. But when it comes to antivirus on servers, especially not Windows servers, it becomes a little more difficult. These are things we start seeing lacking in a lot of organizations. Secure system and applications. When it comes to the development of applications, again, something we see a little bit. The OWASP requirements, we'll talk on that later. Limiting access. We all assign username and passwords on everything. We know we should have authentication. Assigning unique IDs and two-factor authentication, another thing we see missing a lot, we'll touch on that more. Physical controls, we know how to throw a lock on a door. Logging, another talk on logging. Pen testing and scans, again, something we see a lot. Vulnerability scans missing in smaller organizations, not necessarily large ones. And implementation of policies and documentation. We all hate it, but we got to do it. So, number 11 and 12, we'll talk more online. We don't have much time to cover those. Those are small, easy, 2-second things. And hopefully we'll have some sample policies up on the site soon as to things you can go, I have a policy and here's what you need to actually follow. Again, a policy is not just good by itself, you actually have to do it. So
Somebody laughs.
I'll update it online. So what does everyone think is the number 1 problem facing organizations that have to deal with PCI? Logging! Yes, another talk on logs. It's really the mother of all requirements when it comes to wrapping your head around what has to be done. And there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. I'm glad people have actually seen this image before. BrewCon, not so much. They're like, oh, poor cat. We love BrewCon. We love you folks. So really when it comes down to logging, we all fail at it. Even outside of just PCI, it's something we need a lot of help on. And it's a lot of things that people have said high level, you should do, analysis for anomalies. Well, how do I even start? What is an anomaly? Well, you have to identify that. I don't have time to come up with every possible anomaly. Give me some roadmaps. So PCI says you have to obviously generate the logs, send the logs to central storage to make it difficult to modify, process them, store them for a certain time, and monitor them. You actually have to monitor for alerts. So when it comes to generation of logs, this is, what do we log? Sometimes we say log all the things. That's great, right? A lot of disk storage. Disk storage is cheap now. You can get, 2 terabytes for $80. Yes. But what do we need to do at a minimum, right? For PCI, we want to go above and beyond the minimum, but at a minimum, you have to log, success and fail logs, admin actions, someone actually viewing the logs, initialization if someone resets the logs or modifies the logs, as well as if anything changes or gets deleted in the database. So we'll have on, on the site kind of the how-to guidelines on how to configure for that, instead of just, you should log this and you should monitor this. Well, how do you do that? Also sending all those logs back to a central system for storage and collection. So when it comes to Linux, Mac, network gear, we got that covered. Syslog, it's easy, right? We've been doing this for ages. Syslog all the things. But what about using an agent? It really depends. So, thank you. This is going to get bad fast. I encourage you to drink along.
Show the little cot back here. I'm going to be finishing the talk.
No, I'll be good. So really, it varies. It varies as whether or not you're using some host-based intrusion detection system. So we'll talk on that in a second when it comes to file integrity monitoring. There's a lot of unique situations, especially in Windows, which is obviously what's next is Windows, when you use a file integrity monitoring or some other host-based intrusion detection system, Windows uses event logs, right? You can't send that stuff to syslog. It just doesn't support it. Why? I don't know why Windows. You want to do your own little proprietary thing, that's fine. So in the Windows environment, there's 2 different options. You can either use a Windows event collector, which is going to need another Windows server, and send that stuff off, or you can use an agent, which is usually the case in most organizations, to send that stuff to syslog. Again, we'll have the discussions in the Open PCI project site on how to implement this stuff. I didn't want to bore you with screenshots of the configurations and be like, this is how you do it. Read for the next 5 minutes while I have another drink. So after you collect those logs and send them off, where do you store them? And how do you parse them? How do you actually monitor them? So there's a lot of, the normal commercial solution everyone points to is, I was hoping everyone would just cheer Splunk, because we love Splunk, but it's expensive. Works great in a lot of situations when you have that money, but sometimes you want to allocate that money elsewhere. Don't get me wrong, check out Splunk, see if it's right for your organization. We love Splunk, like I said, but sometimes it's best to go with an open source solution. So there's a lot of options when it comes to log processing analysis. A lot of them are difficult to configure and deploy. These are the 5 we looked at, other than just implementing your own rsyslog server. And these are the 5 that really stand out. FluentD, Logstash, Apache's Flume project, which is somewhat difficult to deploy and configure. Facebook Scribe service, Facebook actually used this internally and released it publicly for open source. We love organizations who do that, who are like, hey, we use this, it worked for us, here's the source, use it.
You don't get much scalable than that.
Yeah, and you don't get much scalable than that. And Graylog too, but which one's right for you? It
varies. Kind of.
Depends. The one we found that we like the most and we recommend a lot is FluentD. In fact, their how-to guide online is just, here's a free alternative to Splunk. And it's really pretty because they use, Kibana for their processing, Elasticsearch for their analysis. Really great tool, and it's scalable and great. So check that out. That's definitely a great open source solution where you won't have to then blow your IT budget. And there's a lot of other ones out there, and so that's why we want to have this project where we can kind of have the discussion of, hey, I deployed this worked great. Hey, I deployed this didn't work so great. So how do you monitor it in the end? You can use some of these tools to write rules and alerts. PCI's requirement says you have to monitor your logs. What is it, daily?
Yes.
Daily. There's a QSA in the room.
No, there's not.
Former QSA.
She's in denial.
Denial of their QSA status.
Well, it was a flashback, wasn't it? She's like, daily.
So, what events do you have to look for and what anomalies do you have to look for? That varies very much on your environment, and it's one of those things that we'll have the guides as to what at a bare minimum would be an alert, such as 10 failed logins on the same system for the same user. Someone might be trying to brute force this, we got an alert on this. So, back to what I was saying about agents earlier. File integrity monitoring is another big requirement we see a lot of people missing out on, and a lot of people have challenge in. So what exactly do you have to monitor when it comes to PCI? You have to focus on any changes to critical system or application files, including configurations. That's a lot to monitor for. That's a lot to consider that you have to look at when it comes to, if I monitor the C drive, I don't want to alert every time the logs go off, and it's a lot you have to tune for. So again, we'll have kind of the tips on how to tune and focus on how you can take and, at least at a baseline, monitor the configurations of an OS. Excuse me. But how do you monitor it? How do you monitor an event change? The PCI requirement says you have to check once a week. You don't have to check it live, check once a week. Granted, from a security perspective, it's better to check it as it happens, doing live monitoring for it, but at a very minimum, you have to check it weekly. So how are ways we can do this through open source? Well, Tripwire, believe it or not, actually has an open source solution. Actually logs out to syslog and doesn't have the scalability management, but if you have 1, 2, 10 systems that you need to monitor, it's a great solution and it's open source. It's actually how they kind of grew.
They're cool because they love the community.
And they do love the community. Yay, Tripsource, or
Tripsource.
Tripwire.
I call dibs on that company name. Then there's OS-Sec. This is kind of one of our favorites. It's difficult to configure, but once you know how to configure it, it's great. It does file integrity monitoring, it does other intrusion detection, and it really is built as a host intrusion detection system. This is why we were mentioning earlier, if you have to deploy an agent for, say, file integrity monitoring, and it has the functionality of parsing Windows event logs and other logs and sending them to a central syslog server, you might as well use that as a forwarder, right? Make the most out of the stuff you actually have to install instead of having to install 10 different programs to accomplish what one can. So OS-Sec is one of those that will take and do that for you. Again, difficult to configure, but cross-platform, works on Windows, Linux, Mac, and that's stuff we want to look for in the project as well. Samhain also works great, and like I said, you have to do it only weekly. You could also home grow it with a nice little script that checks the SHA hashes, or hey, even MD5, and run it against a diff every week. That'll meet your requirement. Is it the most secure? No. But maybe you don't need the most secure since you have it hardened off as tight as possible and you have other controls around it. Sometimes that's all you need in order to appease the assessor. I didn't say auditor. So patch management is the hardest thing, I think, when it comes to secondary to logs, to implement across not just a PCI environment, but an organization as a whole. Because we have some great free and open source solutions for the operating systems. Windows has WSUS, Linux obviously has its built-in package managers if you install from them. If you're not installing from them, hopefully you know how to roll your own. Mac has its own mothership, but when it comes to third-party applications, that's really the most difficult thing we've seen organizations have with implementing it. This is something, like I said, we know a lot, we've searched a lot, and we've recommended a lot. This is something where we're reaching out for more help from people also on. If they have any recommendations, and I'll open it for 2 seconds now if anyone wants to raise a hand and has a recommendation.
How about it pronounced as N-I-N-I-T-E, it's a couple $100 a month.
Not open source, but I like it, commercial. We're looking for open source solutions, by the way, I should also clarify that. There's a lot of commercial solutions that work great. Michelle? I don't believe they're open source, I think they're free though. And it's only personal. Yeah, it doesn't work for corporate. 3, 2.
But this is good.
But this is what the kind of discussion we want is, hey, and also we want to, like I said, this is maybe something that you used open source for your log collection. Instead of spending $30,000, $40,000 a year on your log collection, let's spend that on our patch management. We can spend our money there and upgrade that server we always wanted to upgrade in the closet. Yeah, and there's not really, like I was saying, there's not many alternatives when it comes to patch management stuff. You can't weigh your options a lot, especially in the open source world. Now again, I'm dwelling on patch management a little bit, but this is where, as we were talking earlier about limiting your scope, you want to obviously be as secure as possible, but you want to protect the data that matters. You want to protect the systems that matter. So if your general lounge computer isn't getting patched, is that bad? Yeah. Is that going to kill you? Kill your organization? Probably not. It depends. I just want a drink. So Linux, obviously, as I was saying, as long as you stick to your package managers, using the built-in package managers to manage that, pretty easy to do. But Mac, or Windows, Linux, Windows, WSUS is kind of the go-to for operating system patches at scale to monitor and make sure the deployment. One tool we found great for that is WPackage, which will help you build and roll out custom-built packages for third-party applications, whether that's your payment application or you're rolling out Java updates and Flash updates or Chrome to patch everything else. Works well, but obviously it's not as manageable as some of the more commercial solutions. This is somewhere that if you have a summer, winter, fall break and you want to actually code this stuff, or you have 3 years of spare time and want to code this stuff, this is something that I think as a community we need to focus on trying to roll out something. We're not doing well on this, and we're focusing on buying products for it. Mac, look at Linux. That's about all I can say. There's not really any great Mac third-party application patches that are open source, except for Puppet and Chef are kind of the two that we point at a lot. Which one? Homebrew works great if you're installing from the repos, but you don't install Java or Flash or other party applications like that. You might get and all love Homebrew. It works great, especially if you want that stuff. But yeah, Homebrew would work if it's not that. Plus, I don't believe Homebrew really scales to central repos. Although it should though. I haven't actually tried it yet.
But for third party, but we'll try.
We'll talk about that more online, or we'll speak up later. I like the idea though. And so Puppet and Chef are the two kind of cross-platforms we found that work the greatest for that. They're difficult to configure. There's not really any way that you can just run it and be like, hey, we notice your Flash is out of date on these 4 systems. You actually have to manually configure all of that. So this is, like I said, an area we need a lot of development on, but it's an area that organizations lack, I would say, the second most to logging. Again, PCI doesn't say you have to essentially patch management. If you only have 10 systems, you can run around to those 10 systems and patch them once a month, and you're good. Sadly. Two-factor auth is also kind of the other one we see a lot of organizations trying to wrap their head around. My voice. My face is my passport. We'll be fine. We got time. So, PCI requirement says you have to use 2 or 3 factors when connecting, and here's the little subtle thing, remotely. Really, it defines what is remotely. If you have no remote management into your environment, then you have to be physically on that segment and there's no way to remote in. Guess what? You don't need 2-factor auth, technically.
I'm sorry, I have to steal the mic because I had a client, and this was slightly funny, that had said, we have nobody remotes into the PCI environment. Okay.